I was 16 at the time of the incident, a pretty typical teenage guy, except that I grew up in a heavily wooded area. My house, my whole street, was practically inside a forest, with huge towering trees and brush on all sides. That year, close to the end of the summer, I was invited to a field party. For those who don't know, a field party is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. One of the few parents and police-free party options for underage kids in the suburbs. So I was excited. This was going to be the last big blowout of the summer before school started. I even asked my older brother to pick me up some beer for the occasion. The day of the party, a bunch of friends met up at my house. The field wasn't that far from where I lived, and I knew a shortcut to get there through the woods. The thing is, we all got distracted playing games, and by the time we decided to head out, the sun was starting to set. Now, I wasn't worried about this at all. I knew the woods well, and I was confident that if we left right away, we would make it through before it got too dark. But my friends disagreed. They thought we would get lost and be stuck out in the woods all night. They wanted to take the long way there instead. I was pretty annoyed by this suggestion. None of us had cars, and the long way meant a 30 or 40-minute walk on winding dirt roads, and we were all carrying beer. But my friends didn't care. We argued back and forth a bit until I finally told them they could do whatever they wanted, but I was cutting through the woods and nothing was going to change my mind. It was getting uncomfortably dark by the time my friends left to take the long way. It had been a mistake wasting so much time arguing with them. I was no longer confident I could get through the woods before dark. But I had made a big enough deal about it that I now felt I had something to prove. So I shoved my beer into my backpack, grabbed a flashlight and some hiking gear, including my trusty pocket knife, and headed out into the woods. At first things were going well, and I was actually feeling pretty smug. I was following a trail I knew, and there was still a dim purple light in the woods, so I didn't even need my flashlight. And I was making good time. I pictured myself already several beers in by the time my friends showed up, tired and dusty from the roads. And then we would all have a good laugh about how wrong they had all been, how they should have just listened to me in the first place. Of course, I wouldn't have rubbed it in or anything. I wasn't that kind of guy. But then, a drop of rain landed on my cheek. This was odd. It wasn't supposed to rain that night. I had checked the weather earlier that day, and it said clear skies. That's when I heard thunder. Not far off kind of thunder either. This was sky-cracking, earth-rumbling, bone-chilling, caught in the center of the storm kind of thunder. And then, suddenly, I was in the center of a storm. It was like the whole forest had erupted with water. Torrents of rain pelted down at me through the canopy, overwhelmingly loud as it bounced off leaves and made the tree trunks moan and creak. I immediately started racing back towards my house. I was disappointed about the party, but figured no one would show up in this weather anyway. And my friends were probably right now rushing back towards my house to get out of the rain. I was moving quickly, swerving around trees, jumping over tangled underbrush, when I tripped and flew forward into a wild rose bush. The thorns tore at my skin, stinging me in 100 different places. I got up carefully after that, pulling the thorns from my skin. This sucked. It was still raining hard, and I was soaked now to the bone and covered in mud and scratches, and on top of everything, it was getting too dark to see. That's when it hit me. I didn't know where I was or how to get back to my house from here. Falling had disoriented me, and I had completely lost my bearings. I felt a jolt of fear now as I switched on my flashlight and tried to find a trail or some familiar landmark, but it was so dark and the rain made everything look strange. Not knowing what else to do, I took a guess and started walking in what I thought was the direction of my house. I walked for what felt like a long time, shivering so hard my teeth were chattering as the rain continued to roar through the trees. But there was no sign of my house or any of the other backyards in my neighborhood. This was about the time I started to panic. I pinned myself to a tree trunk and took out my phone. I thought about calling my parents, but I didn't want to get in trouble for being in the woods after dark, so I called my brother. The phone rang a few times, and I heard someone answer, but then all I got was static. I guess something was wrong with my phone. I let out a frustrated shout and then realized my phone was getting soaked. I turned around and tried to shield it from the rain. That's when I noticed a light between the trees in the distance. It looked like it was coming from a house. Relief flooded through me. I ran towards the house, weaving round trees and jumping through the soaking wet underbrush. But as I approached the house, I realized it wasn't familiar in the slightest. It was a little cottage, all on its own in the middle of the woods. It didn't appear to be on any street or connected to any roads at all. I thought this was weird, but since it was still raining and the cottage looked cozy and well maintained, I didn't worry too much about it. I walked up onto the porch out of the rain. There was a wicker rocking chair there and lace curtains in the windows. The place probably belonged to an old lady. I knocked on the door, figuring I could ask the old lady for help. Maybe she could give me a better idea of where I was and maybe let me in to wait out the storm. But as I knocked on the door, it creaked open on its own. Now I felt really awkward, standing there, dripping wet, covered in mud and cuts on a stranger's porch with the front door wide open. I leaned in a little. Hello? Your front door was open, I called out. Hello, a voice said from behind me. I spun around. There was a girl standing across from me on the porch, staring at me. She was about my age, maybe 16 or 17, and very pretty, with dark hair and big brown eyes. She was dressed in a light summer dress with a weird and very intricate-looking pattern on it. Her feet were bare. Oh, hi, I said, confused. Where had this girl come from? She wasn't the least bit wet from the rain, and I couldn't figure out how she could have gotten onto the porch without my seeing her. Hello, she said again, and smiled. There was something creepy about her smile. I couldn't put my finger on what it was exactly. There was just something off. But she was very pretty. I lost my way in the rain, I said, feeling myself start to blush. I live over on Cedar. Do you know how to get there from here? She shrugged and laughed. She had a pretty laugh, almost bell-like. You should come inside, she said, out of the rain. And she walked past me into the house. I stood there for a minute. There was something weird about this whole situation, and yet the house was warm and welcoming, and behind me, the forest was cold and dark and dripping with rain. So I ignored my instincts and went inside. The girl shut the door gently behind me and smiled again. The inside of the cottage was old-fashioned looking, with lots of antique furniture and lace. I asked the girl where her parents were, half expecting her to tell me this was the house of her grandmother or an old eccentric aunt. But she didn't reply. She just laughed again, that bell-like laugh, and handed me some towels to dry off. I thanked her, but I was feeling incredibly uncomfortable. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something off about this girl and about this whole situation. I took out my cell and told her I would call my brother to pick me up. Where exactly are we? I asked. Can you give me directions? She smiled again and then gently pulled the phone from my hand. Stay for a while, she said, leading me to a comfortable-looking armchair in the living room. Sit, please. Warm yourself. Have something to eat." There was a crackling fire in the fireplace nearby. It did feel good against my cold skin. I stared into the flames. They were dancing hypnotically and enjoyed the warmth against my cheeks. It couldn't hurt to stay, just a little while. It was still raining after all, and dark. What was my hurry? I wrapped myself in a lace blanket and sank into the armchair, now feeling more warm and content than I had in a long time. Soon after, the girl brought me tea and a big plate full of cupcakes, chocolate eclairs, and gingerbread. I accepted them gratefully. I tried to ask the girl some questions after that, tried to figure out who she was and where she was from, but she deflected all my questions with a smile or a bell-like giggle, or an offer of more tea or dessert. The pastries were delicious and made me feel full and sleepy, and soon it seemed natural not to talk, to just sit and stare into the fire. She watched me intently as I did so and eventually took out a guitar. Wow, she's a musician too, I thought, feeling incredibly lucky now. I loved music and always had a thing for girls who could play. She started strumming away and singing softly. She had a beautiful voice. Then I felt a sudden slicing pain around my neck. It was like dozens of thin, invisible threads had wrapped themselves around my throat and were cutting into my skin. I tried to sit up, to pull the threads away, but found I couldn't move. The lace blanket I was wrapped in was holding my arms down. It was like it was alive all of a sudden and was tightening around my body like a constrictor. This woke me up completely. I cried out, but the threads around my neck only tightened. I coughed now and choked. I couldn't breathe. I looked over at the girl, and she just stared back at me and smiled. I'll never forget that smile. Beautiful and serene, with an eerie sort of hunger in her big eyes as I gasped and choked for air. Spots began to flash across my field of vision. I was going to lose consciousness. I thrashed and struggled for my life. At the same time, my hand brushed against something in my pocket. It was my pocket knife. I managed to pull it out and unfold it under the constricting lace. Then I tore the blanket apart with it, and then the threads around my neck. The threads made loud, twanging sounds as they broke apart like snapping guitar strings. I gasped for air, finally, able to breathe again. At the same time, the girl stood up, and a horrible rage flashed across her face. She rushed at me, and I sliced blindly with my knife, defending myself. Then, everything went dark. The next thing I remember was the sound of my cell phone buzzing. I opened my eyes, groggy and out of it, dust drifting past me in the early morning sun. I was on the floor and covered in thick cobwebs, like I had just escaped from one of those giant spiders from The Hobbit. I jumped to my feet, batting and pulling the webbing away from my body, chills running up and down my skin. But the webbing wasn't the only thing freaking me out. The cozy cottage with the lace and the antique furniture I thought I had walked into last night was now, in the light of day, an abandoned shack filled with broken furniture and dead leaves. What the hell had happened to me last night? Then I noticed my pocket knife on the floor not far from where I was standing. It was sticking out of the back of a huge dead spider. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The spider had the same pattern on its back that the girl had had on her dress. I bolted out of there as fast as I could. I left my knife. I didn't want to go near that thing, that spider or whatever it was. There were about 20 messages on my phone from my brother and my friends. I called my brother and found my way back to my street and my house. I told him and my friends what had happened, but none of them believed me. A few days later, I tried to prove it to them. I took them out into the woods and tried to lead them to the cottage, but I couldn't find it. No matter how hard I looked, it was just gone. But I swear what happened to me that night was real. Later that same week, I went out and bought myself another pocket knife. I used to only carry it when I was hiking, but now I hardly go anywhere without it. And I never, ever go out into the woods after dark. Thanks for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. Next week, I'll be doing a scary fairy profile video. There are lots of weird and creepy types of fairies out there, and I hope to introduce you to a few of them. In the meantime, this channel is just starting out and could really use your support, so please like, comment, share, and subscribe if you're new. Oh, and please send me your requests and true fairy encounter stories. I would love to hear them. My email is in the description below. And until next time, this has been a visit from your scary fairy godmother.